The diary. My mother hid from me, revealed a past I couldn't escape. The house felt unbearably quiet after my mother's funeral, as though the walls themselves had absorbed the weight of her absence. I wandered through her room, touching the things she had left behind, each object carrying a memory that pressed against my chest. Her perfume still lingered faintly in the air, and the sight of her neatly folded clothes made my throat tighten. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, just trying to feel close to her again, when my foot pressed against a floorboard that shifted slightly under my weight. The sound was small, but in the silence, it felt like a whisper calling me closer. Curiosity pushed me to kneel down, my fingers tracing the edge of the loose board. It took some effort, but eventually I pried it up, revealing a narrow space beneath. My heart skipped when I saw a small, leather-bound book tucked carefully inside, wrapped in a faded cloth as though it had been hidden with great care. I pulled it out slowly, my hands trembling, and brushed the dust from its cover. It was a diary, old but intact, and the moment I held it, I knew it wasn't just an ordinary journal. I sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the diary in my lap. The leather was cracked with age, the corners worn from use, but it felt alive in my hands, as though it had been waiting for me all these years. I hesitated, afraid of what I might find inside. My mother had always been private, careful with her words, and the idea of reading her hidden thoughts felt like crossing a line. But the fact that she had hidden it beneath the floorboards told me this wasn't just for her. It was meant to be found. When I finally opened the diary, the first page made my breath catch. Written in her familiar handwriting, steady and deliberate, were the words, "To my child." My chest tightened as I traced the letters with my finger. She had written this for me, though the ink had faded with time. The realization made my hands shake. This wasn't just her diary, it was a message, one she had left behind long before I ever knew it existed. I turned the page carefully, my eyes scanning the lines. The words were dated years ago, long before her illness, long before I had even suspected she carried secrets. She wrote as though she knew I would one day find it, as though she had been speaking directly to me across time. My heart pounded as I read the first sentence. If you're reading this, then the life you've known isn't the whole truth. The room seemed to tilt around me as I read those words again and again. My mother, the woman I thought I knew better than anyone, had hidden a diary that began with a warning. What truth had she kept from me? What part of her life had been buried beneath the floorboards, waiting for me to uncover it only after she was gone? The questions swirled in my mind, heavy and relentless, making it hard to breathe. I closed the diary for a moment, pressing it against my chest, as though holding it tighter might steady me. Memories of her flooded my mind. Her laughter, her gentle advice, the way she always seemed to know what I needed before I even asked. She had been my anchor, my guide, and yet here I was, holding proof that she had lived a life I knew nothing about. The thought made me feel both betrayed and desperate to understand. The silence of the house pressed in around me, broken only by the ticking of the clock on the wall. I stared at the diary, torn between fear and curiosity. Part of me wanted to put it back under the floorboard, to pretend I had never found it. But another part, stronger and louder, demanded to know the truth. My mother had left this for me, and I couldn't walk away from it now. I opened the diary again, my eyes drawn back to the words on the first page. They seemed to glow in the dim light, pulling me deeper into the mystery she had left behind. I didn't know what I would find in the pages that followed, secrets, confessions, maybe even lies. But I knew one thing for certain, my life would never be the same after this. If you're reading this, the words whispered from the page, then the life you've known isn't the whole truth. I turned the fragile pages of the diary slowly, the paper whispering under my fingertips. The handwriting was my mother's, neat and deliberate, but the words felt like they belonged to someone else. She began by describing a life I had never heard of, a place I had never known she lived in. She wrote about a small town far from here, where she had once gone by a different name. Seeing that name written in her hand made my chest tighten. It was strange, almost like reading about a stranger, yet I knew it was her. The more I read, the more unsettled I became. She spoke of days filled with fear, of nights when she couldn't sleep because she was certain someone was watching her. She described the feeling of being hunted, of always looking over her shoulder. My mother, the woman who had always seemed so calm and steady, had lived a life of running before I was even born. The thought made me shiver. She explained how she had left everything behind. her home, her friends, even her name. She had chosen to bury her past so deeply that no one could find it. She wrote about changing her identity, about creating a new life where no one would know who she really was. I could almost feel her fear bleeding through the ink, as though she had written these words with trembling hands. I paused, staring at the page, trying to imagine her as a young woman, terrified and alone, forced to abandon everything she knew. It was hard to reconcile that image with the mother I remembered, the one who had always seemed so strong, so unshakable. But here, in her own words, she admitted to being afraid, to being desperate enough to erase herself completely. The diary went on to describe the journey she had taken, moving from place to place, never staying long enough to be noticed. She wrote about the loneliness of starting over, of pretending to be someone she wasn't, of hiding her true self from everyone she met. She had carried this secret for years, and I realized now that she had carried it even while raising me. My heart ached as I read her words. She hadn't just been protecting herself, she had been protecting me too. Every choice she made, every lie she told, had been to keep me safe from something I still didn't understand. But the fear in her writing was clear. Whatever she had been running from, it wasn't small. It was something powerful enough to make her abandon her entire life. I turned another page and found her describing the moment she decided to stop running. She wrote about meeting my father, about how he had given her a reason to stay, a reason to believe she could build a life without fear. But even then, she admitted, the shadows of her past never left her. She had hidden the diary because she knew one day the truth might matter, and she wanted me to know who she really was. The words grew heavier as I read on. She hinted at people she once trusted, people who had turned against her. She didn't name them, but she described betrayal, the kind that cut so deep it left scars that never healed. She wrote about how betrayal had forced her to run, how it had shattered the life she once had. My hands shook as I realized this wasn't just a story of escape, it was a story of survival. I leaned back, the diary heavy in my lap, my mind racing with questions. Who had she been before she became my mother? Who had betrayed her so badly that she had to erase her identity? And most of all, what danger had she been protecting me from all these years? The answers were buried in these pages, and I knew I had no choice but to keep reading. The last line on the page made my breath catch, the words etched into my mind like a brand. I wasn't running from strangers. I was running from family. I turned another page in the diary, and something slipped out, fluttering to the floor like a forgotten leaf. My heart jumped as I bent down and picked it up. It was a photograph, old and faded, the edges curled and worn with time. I held it carefully, afraid it might crumble in my hands. The moment I saw the face in the center, my breath caught. It was my mother, younger, smiling in a way I had never seen before, surrounded by people I didn't recognize. The photograph was strange, unsettling even. My mother stood close to a man and a woman, their arms linked as though they were family or dear friends. Another figure stood slightly apart, a man with sharp eyes who seemed to be watching her more than the camera. None of them were familiar to me, and yet the closeness in their posture suggested they had once been important to her. I stared at their faces, trying to place them, but they were strangers. What unsettled me most was not just the people, but the way my mother looked. She seemed lighter, freer, as though she belonged to a world I had never been part of. The smile on her face wasn't the careful, measured one I remembered from my childhood. It was open, unguarded, almost radiant. It was a version of her I had never known, and it made me realize how little I truly understood about her past. I turned the photograph over, hoping for some clue, and my stomach twisted when I saw the date written in neat ink. It didn't match anything I knew about her life. According to her stories, she should have been somewhere else entirely at that time, living a different life under a different name. But here she was, captured in a moment that didn't fit the timeline she had given me. I read the date again, my mind racing. Had she lied about where she was? Had she erased this part of her life on purpose? The diary had already revealed that she had lived under another name, that she had been running from something or someone. But this photograph suggested more than just escape. It suggested she had built another life, one she had hidden from me completely. I studied the faces again, searching for answers in their expressions. The woman beside her looked familiar in a way I couldn't explain, as though I had seen her before in passing, maybe in a dream or a memory I couldn't place. The men were harder to read, but there was something about the way they stood, the way they looked at her, that made me uneasy. They weren't strangers to her. They had been part of her world. The diary pages around the photograph didn't mention them, at least not yet. It was as if she had slipped the photo in as a silent confession, a piece of the puzzle she couldn't bring herself to write about. My hands shook as I held it, the weight of it far heavier than a simple picture should be. This wasn't just a memory, it was evidence of a life she had buried. I thought about the warning she had written. I wasn't running from strangers. I was running from family. The words echoed in my mind as I looked at the photograph again. Could these people be the family she meant? Were they the ones she had fled from? If so, why had she kept this photograph at all? Why not destroy it? Erase it completely, the way she had erased her name? The silence of the room pressed in around me, broken only by the sound of my own breathing. I felt as though the photograph was staring back at me, demanding answers I wasn't ready to face. My mother had lived a life I didn't know, with people I had never met, in a time that didn't match the story she had told me. And now, with her gone, I was left to uncover the truth alone. The woman in the photo looked like my mother, but the life around her wasn't ours. I turned the page slowly, the paper fragile beneath my fingertips, and the words that followed made my chest tighten. My mother's handwriting was steady, but the tone of her words had shifted. It was no longer the voice of a woman sharing memories. It was the voice of someone leaving behind a warning. She wrote that not everyone who claimed to know her could be trusted, that some people would come with kind faces and soft words, but their intentions would be anything but safe. She described betrayal in a way that made my stomach twist. She didn't give names, but she wrote about someone she had once trusted with her life, someone who had turned against her when she needed them most. The betrayal had nearly cost her everything, her freedom, her safety, and even me. Reading those words, I could almost feel her fear bleeding through the ink, as though she had written them with trembling hands. I paused, staring at the page, my mind racing. My mother had always seemed so careful, so guarded, but I had never understood why. Now I realized that her caution hadn't been habit, it had been survival. She had lived her life knowing that betrayal could come from anyone, even those closest to her. And now, through these pages, she was passing that fear on to me. The diary grew darker as I read on. She wrote about how betrayal had forced her to run, how it had shattered the life she had built under her old name. She had trusted the wrong person, and that mistake had nearly destroyed her. The words were heavy, filled with regret, but also with determination. She had survived, but she wanted me to understand the cost of trusting too easily. Thought about the photograph I had found tucked between the pages, about the strangers who had once stood so close to her. Were they the ones she had meant? Had one of them been the betrayer? The thought made my skin prickle. If they had once been part of her life, then maybe they were still out there, waiting, watching, ready to resurface now that she was gone. The silence of the room pressed in around me as I read her words again. She wasn't just telling me about her past, she was preparing me for my future. She knew that once I found this diary, I would be drawn into the same shadows she had tried to escape, and she wanted me to be ready, to know that danger could come disguised as friendship. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to steady my breathing. The idea that people might come to me, claiming to know her, claiming to have answers, filled me with dread. How would I know who to trust? How would I know who was lying? My mother's warning echoed in my mind, louder than anything else. Not everyone is who they seem. I opened my eyes and looked back at the page. The ink was slightly smudged, as though her hand had pressed too hard when she wrote the final lines. It was as if she had wanted to make sure I understood, to make sure the words would stay with me long after she was gone. My throat tightened as I read them again, feeling the weight of her fear and her love in every letter. The diary was no longer just a story of her past. It was a guide, a shield, and a burden all at once. She had hidden it for me, knowing that one day I would need it. And now, sitting in her empty room, I realized that her secrets had become mine, whether I wanted them or not. Her final words on the page sent a chill through me, a warning that felt less like advice and more like a command. If they ever find you, don't tell them who you are. The knock came late in the evening, sharp and deliberate, echoing through the quiet house. I froze where I sat, the diary still open on my lap, my mother's words burning in my mind. If they ever find you, don't tell them who you are. My heart pounded as I rose slowly, every instinct telling me not to answer. But the knocking came again, steady and patient, as though the person on the other side knew I was there and wouldn't leave until I opened the door. I approached cautiously, my hand hovering over the doorknob. Through the thin curtain, I could make out the silhouette of a figure standing still, waiting. They weren't fidgeting or shifting their weight like someone uncertain. They stood with the calmness of someone who belonged there, someone who expected to be let in. That certainty unsettled me more than anything else. When I finally opened the door, a stranger stood before me. They were older, with tired eyes that seemed to study me too closely, as if searching for something familiar in my face. "You look just like her," they said softly, their voice carrying a strange mix of sorrow and relief. My throat tightened, and I gripped the doorframe to steady myself. They knew my mother. Before I could speak, the stranger continued. "I've been waiting for her to resurface," they said, their tone calm, almost rehearsed. I knew it was only a matter of time. The words sent a chill down my spine. Resurface? My mother had been gone for weeks, buried and mourned. How could this person be waiting for her return? And why did they sound so certain that her story wasn't finished? I tried to keep my voice steady as I asked, "Who are you?" The stranger gave a faint smile, but it didn't reach their eyes. "Someone who knew her before she became the woman you knew. Someone who remembers the life she left behind." My pulse quickened. The diary had spoken of that life, the one under another name, the one she had buried. And now, standing at my door, was someone who claimed to have lived in it with her. The stranger's gaze flicked past me, toward the inside of the house, as though they expected to see her step into the room at any moment. "She promised me once that the truth would come out," they said. "I didn't think it would take this long." Their words made my stomach twist. My mother had promised someone the truth would surface, but she had never told me. Instead, she had left me the diary, hidden away, waiting for me to find it. I tightened my grip on the door, torn between slamming it shut and demanding answers. The stranger's calmness unsettled me more than anger ever could. They weren't here by chance. They had come with purpose, with knowledge, and with a certainty that made me feel exposed. My mother's warning echoed louder in my mind. Not everyone who claims to know me can be trusted. The silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. I wanted to ask how they knew her, what they wanted, why they had come now of all times. But fear held my tongue. The strangers seemed to sense my hesitation and leaned closer, lowering their voice. "You found something, haven't you?" they asked. My breath caught. I stepped back instinctively, my heart racing. How could they know? The diary was hidden, tucked away where no one should have found it but me. Yet this stranger stood at my door, speaking as though they already knew what I had uncovered. Their eyes locked onto mine, unblinking, waiting for me to confirm it. The air felt colder, the shadows deeper, as realization struck me. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't chance. They hadn't just come because my mother was gone. They had come because they knew I had found the diary. But how did they know she was gone? And that I had found the diary? I turned deeper into the diary, the pages growing more fragile as though they had been handled many times before. Between two entries, folded carefully and pressed flat, I found a bundle of letters tied together with a thin ribbon. My breath caught as I untied it. The paper yellowed with age, the ink faded but still legible. These weren't diary entries. They were letters, written in my mother's hand, but addressed to someone I had never heard of. My pulse quickened as I realized I was holding a part of her life she had never meant to share openly. The first letter began tenderly, her words softer than anything I had ever heard her speak aloud. She wrote about longing, about missing someone she had once loved deeply. The tone was different from the warnings and confessions in the diary. It was vulnerable, almost aching. She described nights spent awake, thinking of him, and how the memory of his voice had carried her through the darkest times. My chest tightened as I read, realizing my mother had loved someone before the life I knew, someone important enough to keep hidden. As I read further, the letters revealed more. She spoke of choices she had been forced to make, of leaving him behind for reasons she couldn't fully explain in writing. She wrote about danger, about betrayal, about how staying with him would have put them both at risk. Yet, despite the fear, her words carried a tenderness that never faded. Whoever this man was, he had been more than just a fleeting part of her past. He had been central to it. One letter in particular made my hands tremble. She wrote about being pregnant, about the fear and hope that came with it. She didn't name the child, but I knew instantly she was writing about me. She described the way she imagined holding me, the way she wanted to give me a life free from the shadows that haunted her. But what struck me most was the way she spoke of the man she was writing to, as though he were the father of the child she carried. I stopped reading, my heart pounding in my ears. The man she described wasn't the man I had grown up calling my father. The details didn't match. The timing, the emotions, the way she spoke of him as though he were far away but still deeply connected to her. My throat tightened as I realized what the letters were suggesting. The man who raised me might not have been my real father at all. I forced myself to keep reading, desperate for clarity. In another letter, she wrote about her fear of being found, of how she had to cut ties with the man she loved to protect both him and me. She spoke of sacrifice, of baring her heart so that I could grow up safe. Her words were filled with sorrow, but also with determination. She had chosen survival over love, and in doing so, she had rewritten both of our lives. The letters painted a picture of a woman torn between two worlds, the one she had left behind and the one she had built for me. She had loved deeply, but she had also feared deeply, and that fear had shaped every choice she made. I realized then that the diary wasn't just a confession, it was a map, leading me through the pieces of her life she had hidden away. I sat back, the letters spread out before me, my mind spinning. Everything I thought I knew about my family, about myself, was unraveling. My mother had lived a life of secrets, and now those secrets were mine to carry. The man I had called my father, the man who had raised me, might not have been the one who gave me life. The thought made my stomach twist with both anger and sorrow. The silence of the house pressed in around me, heavy and suffocating. I wanted to believe there was some mistake, that I had misread her words, but the letters were clear. She had loved another man, and he had been there at the beginning of my story. My entire identity felt shaken, as though the ground beneath me had cracked open. I gathered the letters back into a bundle, my hands trembling as I tied the ribbon once more. My mother had hidden them for a reason, but she had also left them for me to find. She wanted me to know the truth, even if it shattered everything I thought I knew. And as I stared at the words she had written, the truth echoed in my mind like a drumbeat. The man she described wasn't the man who raised me. I couldn't stop staring at the photograph, the faces etched into my mind like shadows I couldn't shake. The diary had given me fragments, but not enough to form the whole picture. I needed answers, and the only way to get them was to find someone who had been there. After days of searching through old records and following faint trails, I finally tracked down one of the people in the photo, a woman who looked older now, but unmistakably the same person who had once stood beside my mother with a smile that seemed so genuine. When I arrived at her small house on the edge of town, my heart pounded so hard I thought it might give me away. She opened the door cautiously, her eyes narrowing as she studied me. For a moment, I thought she might slam it shut, but then her expression softened. "You look like her," she whispered, almost to herself. The words made my chest tighten. She knew my mother. She had been part of that hidden life. Inside, the air smelled faintly of dust and old books. She motioned for me to sit, her hands trembling slightly as she poured tea into chipped cups. I showed her the photograph, and her eyes lingered on it for a long time before she finally spoke. "That was another life," she said quietly. "A life your mother tried to bury." Her voice carried both sadness and something else. Guilt, maybe, or fear. She began to tell me fragments of the past, pieces of a story that sounded familiar but twisted. According to her, my mother hadn't been the one betrayed. She had been the betrayer. She spoke of trust broken, of promises shattered, of people left behind in the wreckage of choices my mother had made. Her words painted a picture of a woman who had turned her back on those closest to her, not to protect herself, but to protect secrets she wouldn't share. I listened, my stomach twisting. This version of my mother didn't match the one I had read about in the diary. The diary had spoken of betrayal against her, of her being forced to run because someone she trusted had turned on her. But here, this woman insisted it was the other way around, that my mother had been the one to walk away, leaving others to pay the price. The contradiction made my head spin. I pressed her for details, desperate to know more, but she grew quiet, her eyes darting toward the window as though someone might be listening. "There are things I can't say," she whispered. "Not here, not now. But know this, your mother wasn't the woman you thought she was. She carried secrets that could destroy more than just herself." Her words sent a chill down my spine. I thought of the letters I had found, the ones that hinted at a love my mother had left behind, a man who might have been my real father. The woman's story didn't mention him at all. Instead, she spoke of alliances, of choices made in the shadows, of debts that had never been repaid. It was as though she was telling me a completely different story, one that clashed violently with the diary's version of events. The silence between us grew heavy, filled with questions I couldn't bring myself to ask. Was my mother the victim she had claimed to be in her diary? Or was she the betrayer this woman described? The truth seemed to shift like sand beneath my feet, impossible to hold on to. I wanted to believe my mother's words, but the certainty in this woman's voice made me doubt everything. As I left her house, the photograph heavy in my pocket, I felt more lost than ever. Two stories, both told with conviction, both impossible to reconcile. My mother had left me with a diary full of secrets, but the people who had known her carried their own versions of the truth. And now, I was caught in the middle, unsure of which story to believe. The night air was cold as I stepped outside, but the chill that ran through me came from something deeper. I realized then that the truth wasn't just hidden, it was fractured, scattered between lies and half-truths. And if I wanted to uncover it, I would have to decide who to trust. But one thing was certain, someone was lying. But who? I turned the pages of the diary with a growing sense of dread, the inked words pulling me deeper into a past I had never imagined. My mother's voice on the page shifted again, no longer tender or cautious, but raw and heavy with pain. She wrote about trust, how she had once believed she was surrounded by people who would protect her, people she called companions, almost family. But then came the betrayal, sharp and sudden, from someone she had trusted most. The words bled with heartbreak, as though even years later the wound had never healed. She described the moment she realized the truth. A secret she had shared in confidence had been used against her, twisted and delivered into the hands of those she feared most. She didn't write the betrayer's name, but she described the feeling of the knife in her back. Not a literal one, but the kind that cuts deeper, the kind that comes from someone you once loved or trusted. My chest tightened as I read, imagining her fear, her desperation, as she realized she could no longer stay where she was. The betrayal had forced her into hiding. She wrote about leaving in the dead of night, carrying nothing but what she could hold, her heart pounding with every step. She described the silence of the streets, the way shadows seemed to follow her, the way she couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were always on her. She had left behind not just a life, but people she had once called her own. And she had done it because one of them had turned against her. I paused, staring at the page, my mind racing. Who had it been? Was it one of the faces in the photograph? The woman who had spoken to me? The stranger who had knocked on my door? The thought made my skin prickle. My mother had been betrayed once, and now I was walking the same path, surrounded by people who claimed to know her but whose stories didn't match. The diary grew darker as I read on. She wrote about the paranoia that followed her, the way she could never trust anyone again. Every smile felt like a mask, every kind word like a trap. She had built her new life carefully, layer by layer, but the fear never left her. She knew the betrayer was still out there, alive, waiting, watching, and she feared that one day they would find her again. I thought of the stranger at my door, the way they had spoken with such certainty, as though they had been waiting for me. I thought of the woman from the photograph, her story so different from the diaries. My mother's warning echoed in my mind. Not everyone who claims to know me can be trusted. The pieces were starting to fit together, but the picture they formed was terrifying. I closed the diary for a moment, pressing it against my chest, my heart pounding. The betrayal wasn't just her story anymore, it was mine. If the person who had turned against her was still alive, then they might know about me. They might know that I had found the diary, that I was uncovering the truth she had tried so hard to bury. The silence of the house felt heavier than ever, broken only by the faint creak of the floorboards. I froze, listening, my breath caught in my throat. Was it just the house settling, or was someone really there? The paranoia she had described was seeping into me now, making every shadow feel like a threat. I opened the diary again, my eyes scanning the final lines of the entry. Her words were sharp, etched with fear and certainty. If you are reading this, know that betrayal never dies. The one who turned against me will never stop watching. My hands trembled as I traced the letters, the weight of her warning pressing down on me. The truth hit me like a cold wave, leaving me breathless. My mother's betrayer wasn't just a ghost from her past. They were still alive. And as I sat there clutching the diary, I couldn't shake the feeling that they already knew about me. The one who betrayed her may now be watching me. I dug deeper into the diary, turning past the pages filled with warnings and confessions, until my fingers brushed against something stiff tucked into the back cover. My pulse quickened as I pulled out a small envelope, sealed but brittle with age. Inside were folded papers, yellowed and fragile, but still intact. I spread them across the desk, my breath catching as I realized they weren't just scraps of memory, they were official documents. Property deeds, identification cards, and receipts, all bearing a name I didn't recognize at first. But then it hit me. It was my mother's handwriting, her face in the photographs, only under a completely different name. The property deed was the first thing that caught my eye. It listed a small house in another city, one I had never heard her mention. The date on the document placed it years before I was born, during the time she had supposedly been living quietly, building the life I thought I knew. My chest tightened as I realized she had owned an entire home, a place she had never spoken of, a place that might still exist. Why had she abandoned it? Why had she hidden it from me? The identification cards were even more unsettling. They bore her face, unmistakably her, but the name printed beneath was not the one I had grown up with. It was the name she'd written about in the diary, the one she had lived under before she became my mother. Seeing it in print, stamped and official, made it real in a way her words alone hadn't. She hadn't just changed her name in secret, she had built an entire identity around it. The receipts were small but telling. They showed purchases from shops in that same city, dated across several years. Groceries, clothing, even furniture. She hadn't just passed through, she had lived there day after day, building a life that seemed stable, ordinary, and complete. And then, without explanation, she had walked away from it all. I sat back, staring at the spread of documents, my mind spinning. My mother hadn't just been running, she had been starting over, again and again, leaving behind pieces of herself like breadcrumbs scattered across time. Each identity, each life, was a mask she had worn, and I was only now beginning to see how many there had been. The weight of it pressed down on me. Who had she been in that other life? Who had she loved? Who had she trusted? Who had betrayed her? And why had she chosen to abandon it all to become the woman I knew? The diary had given me glimpses, but these documents were proof. Tangible evidence that she had lived entire chapters of her life without me ever knowing. I thought of the letters I had found earlier, the ones that hinted at a man she had once loved, a man who might have been my real father. Could he have been part of this other life? Was the house in the deed theirs? The questions piled up faster than I could answer them, each one heavier than the last. The silence of the room felt suffocating as I gathered the papers back into a neat stack. My hands trembled as I slid them into the envelope again, the weight of them far greater than paper should hold. These weren't just documents. They were keys to a life I had never known, a life my mother had buried so deeply. She must have hoped it would never be uncovered. But she had left them for me, hidden with the diary, waiting for the day I would be forced to face the truth. She hadn't destroyed them. She hadn't erased them. She had left them behind, knowing I would one day find them. That thought chilled me more than anything else. As I stared at the envelope, the question pressed against my mind like a shadow I couldn't escape. My mother hadn't just left me secrets. She had left me something more, something I couldn't yet see. And the thought made my heart race with both fear and anticipation. Had she left behind more than just secrets? I couldn't shake the feeling that the photograph was more than just a relic. It was a map, pointing me toward people who still carried pieces of my mother's story. After days of searching, I found another figure from the faded image, a man whose sharp eyes had unsettled me even in the stillness of the photo. He lived in a quiet neighborhood, his house tucked away behind tall hedges, as though he too had something to hide. My stomach churned as I knocked on his door, the diary heavy in my bag, my mother's warnings echoing in my mind. When he opened the door, his gaze locked onto me instantly. His expression shifted, recognition flickering across his face. "You're her child," he said, his voice low and certain. The words made my chest tighten. He didn't ask who I was, he already knew. He stepped aside, motioning for me to enter, and though every instinct screamed at me to turn back, I crossed the threshold. Inside, the air was thick with silence. Old photographs lined the walls, but none of them included my mother. He sat across from me, his eyes sharp, studying me as though weighing how much truth to reveal. I pulled out the photograph, placing it on the table between us. His jaw tightened as he looked at it, his hand hovering over the image but never touching it. "That was before everything fell apart," he muttered. I asked him what he meant, my voice unsteady. He leaned back, his expression hardening. "Your mother wasn't who you think she was," he said. "She wasn't the victim. She was the one who betrayed us." The words hit me like a blow, leaving me breathless. I shook my head, remembering the diary's pages, the fear, the betrayal she had described. But he spoke with conviction, his voice steady, as though he had carried this truth for years. He told me about trust broken, about secrets she had stolen and choices she had made that had left others in ruin. According to him, she had turned her back on them, not because she was forced to, but because she chose to. He painted her as someone who had sacrificed loyalty for survival, someone who had left destruction in her wake. My hands trembled as I listened, the image of my mother shifting with every word he spoke. I wanted to argue, to defend her, but doubt gnawed at me. The diary had told one story, his words told another, and both carried the weight of truth. My mother had written about betrayal, about being forced to run because someone had turned against her. But here was a man who claimed she had been the betrayer, the one who had shattered their trust. The contradiction made my head spin. I pressed him for details, desperate to find clarity. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "She left us to burn," he said. "And she never looked back. You think she was protecting you, but she was protecting herself. Don't let her lies become yours." His words cut deep, leaving me shaken. Could my mother have lied in her diary? Could she have twisted the truth to protect her image, even after death? The silence between us grew heavy, the air thick with tension. I thought of the letters I had found, the ones that hinted at a love she had left behind. A man who might have been my real father. None of it fit neatly together. Every piece of the puzzle seemed to contradict the others, leaving me with a fractured picture I couldn't make sense of. As I left his house, the photograph felt heavier in my pocket, the diary heavier in my bag. Two stories, both told with conviction, both impossible to reconcile. My mother's words and his words clashed violently in my mind, leaving me adrift in uncertainty. The truth was no longer a single path. It was a maze of lies, half-truths, and secrets. The night air was cold as I stepped outside, but the chill that ran through me came from something deeper. I realized then that the truth wasn't just hidden, it was broken, shattered into pieces that didn't fit together. And as I walked away, my heart pounding, one thought echoed louder than all the rest. The truth was fractured, and I didn't know which side to believe. I sat at the desk with the diary open, the photograph beside it, and the bundle of letters spread out like puzzle pieces that refused to fit. For days, I had been drowning in contradictions. My mother's words painting her as a victim, while others swore she had been the betrayer. But as I read and reread her entries, cross-checking them with the fragments I had gathered from strangers, a terrible clarity began to form. The truth wasn't simple. It was layered, twisted, and painful. She had betrayed them, but not for selfish gain. She had done it for me. Her words in the diary grew sharper the deeper I went, no longer the voice of a frightened woman, but of someone who had made an impossible choice. She wrote about the organization she once belonged to, a group bound by loyalty and secrecy. They had been her family once, closer than blood, but when she discovered what they planned, she couldn't stay. She couldn't let them use her, or worse, use me. So she turned against them, breaking the one rule they could never forgive: betrayal. The letters I had found earlier suddenly made sense in a new light. The man she had loved, the one who might have been my real father, had been part of that world too. She had cut him off not because she stopped loving him, but because staying connected to him would have tied me to the organization forever. She had chosen to sever every bond, to erase her past, to build a new life where I could grow up free from their reach. But freedom had come at a cost. Her betrayal had marked her, and she had lived every day knowing they would never stop searching. The diary wasn't just her confession. It was her shield, her way of preparing me for the moment when the past would finally catch up. She hadn't written it to unburden herself. She had written it to pass the burden on to me. I felt the weight of her choices pressing down on me, heavier than the diary itself. She had carried this secret for years, protecting me with every lie she told, every truth she buried. And now, with her gone, the protection was gone too. The organization she had betrayed would see me as her legacy, the unfinished thread in their story. I thought of the stranger who had come to my door, of the woman from the photograph, of the man who had insisted she was the betrayer. They weren't just fragments of her past, they were pieces of the same broken world she had tried to escape. And now they were circling me, each with their own version of the truth, each with their own agenda. The realization made my stomach twist. My mother hadn't been running from strangers. She had been running from people who once called her family, people who had loved her, trusted her, and then turned into her enemies. And now, by uncovering her secrets, I had stepped into the same shadows she had spent her life fleeing. I closed the diary slowly, my hands trembling. The cracks in its leather cover seemed to mirror the cracks in my understanding of her, of myself, of everything I thought I knew. She had betrayed them, yes, but she had done it for me. And in doing so, she had tied me to a legacy I could never escape. The silence of the house pressed in around me, but it no longer felt empty. It felt alive, filled with the weight of eyes I couldn't see, of dangers I couldn't name. My mother had carried this burden until her last breath, and now it was mine to bear. The truth settled over me like a shadow I couldn't shake, and as I stared at the diary one last time, the final thought struck me with chilling certainty. The danger she escaped is now mine to face. The diary sat before me on the desk, its cracked leather cover catching the dim light like a scar that refused to fade. My hands hovered over it, torn between two choices that felt equally impossible. I could destroy it, burn the pages, scatter the ashes, and bury the past once and for all. Or I could keep it, step into the shadows my mother had fled, and accept the dangerous legacy she had left behind. The weight of the decision pressed down on me, heavier than anything I had ever carried. I imagined the fire, the way the pages would curl and blacken, the ink dissolving into smoke. It would be so easy, so final. No one would ever know the secrets my mother had hidden. No one would ever come searching for me because of them. I could walk away, free from the burden of her choices, free from the danger that seemed to grow closer with every passing day. But even as I pictured it, my chest tightened. Destroying the diary wouldn't erase the truth. It would only bury it again, waiting for someone else to stumble upon it. I thought of the strangers who had already appeared at my door, the conflicting stories they had told me, the fractured truths that had left me spinning. They were already circling, already watching. If I destroyed the diary, I would be blind, defenseless, left with nothing but questions. The diary was dangerous, yes, but it was also the only weapon I had. My mother's words echoed in my mind, her warnings etched into me as deeply as the ink on the page. She had betrayed them to protect me. She had carried this burden alone for years, and in the end, she had left it for me to face. She hadn't destroyed the diary. She had hidden it, preserved it, knowing one day I would need it. That choice spoke louder than any words she had written. I ran my fingers over the cracks in the cover, tracing the lines like a map of her life. Each fracture told a story, of fear, of betrayal, of love, of sacrifice. It wasn't perfect, but it was whole, just like her, just like me. The diary wasn't just a record of her past. It was a reminder of who she had been, and of who I was becoming. The silence of the house pressed in around me, but it no longer felt suffocating. It felt alive, filled with possibility, with danger, with truth. I didn't know what the future would hold, or what enemies might come for me now that I had uncovered her secrets. But I knew one thing. I couldn't run from it. I couldn't bury it. I had to face it. I closed the diary gently, the sound of the cover snapping shut like the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. My reflection stared back at me in the darkened window, and for the first time, I didn't just see myself. I saw her too, the woman who had carried this burden before me, the woman who had given me the strength to carry it now. I lifted the diary and held it close, feeling its weight settle into me. It wasn't just her story anymore. It was mine. The lies, the betrayals, the sacrifices. They were threads in a tapestry I hadn't chosen, but one I would finish. My mother had left me with questions, but she had also left me with the chance to find answers. The choice was made. I would not destroy the diary. I would keep it, cracked and worn, as a reminder of the truth and as a guide for the path ahead. The danger she had escaped was now mine to face, but I would face it with open eyes and steady hands. The cracks told a story, and this time, it was mine to finish.